Welcome to Dialogue. The COVID-19 vaccine is a race the whole world must win. Major progress has been made. So how long will it take for vaccines to contain the pandemic? How can fair access be ensured? And what's the status of the Chinese-made vaccines? Those are the topics today. We're going to be joined by Professor Zhonglin Qing from the School of Medicine at Tsinghua University. Also with us, Dr. Dennis Carroll, President of the Global Virome Project, and Dr. Muhammad Munir, a virologist and lecturer in biomedicine at Health and Medicine, Lancaster University. That is our topic. I'm Jonathan Betts. So it's a big week in the race to find a cure to COVID-19. Vaccinations underway in the United States. Pfizer vaccine, the first to be approved there. A second vaccine, Moderna, likely to be approved in the coming days. Dr. Carroll, let me start with you. How big of a moment is this?
Well, we can't overstate how big the moment is right now. It's hard to have imagined 6 months ago that by the end of this calendar year, we would not have one, we would have multiple vaccines that are extremely effective and quite safe. And the fact that we've ended this year with the rollout in the United States, United Kingdom, and other countries right now of this vaccine really speaks volumes of the extraordinary work done by the scientific community globally.
And Dr. Munir, I mean, it seems to be especially urgent in the United States, 300,000 deaths there. So how quickly do you think that we could see some real results from this in terms of infections and deaths?
I think the important thing to understand here is that the vaccines that we are having at the moment, which are extremely effective, 90 to 95% effective, but those effectiveness has been calculated against the severe form of the disease. So people who are vaccinated, they will be protected going into the hospital or unfortunately die. But what these vaccines don't really offer much is that whether the people who are vaccinated would be protected against the infection or would be stopping the spread of the infection. So these are really the questions that need to be addressed when we talk about ending the pandemic, because if the person who are vaccinated are still spreading the infection, there would be relatively little impact on to the shortening the life of this pandemic, but it would certainly be saving the lives. But altogether, we have to achieve at least 70 to 75% population herd immunity until we really start counting the benefit offered by the vaccines.
Yeah, there are some big unknowns in this, and Professor Zhang, I'm going to bring you in on this. I mean, you research vaccines, you research viruses. Tell us what are some of the big questions you have as we look at these vaccination campaigns.
There are actually many unknown questions since we're only into this pandemic less than a year, and not mentioning the vaccine strategy, in particular those have never been approved before. First and foremost, certainly, is the safety and efficacy, which Pfizer and biotech vaccine and Moderna has shown great promise. But long-term benefits, in particular, how durable those immune responses will persist, able to provide protection, is a major scientific question. But only till a year or two, maybe longer, have a better assessment how durable protection those vaccines will be. Apart from those protectivity, we are also looking forward to a better delivery strategy that may cut out some of the burdens that we are facing, such as related logistic issues. But we are very excited to learn this exciting results.
I mean, it is certainly exciting because we have all definitely been suffering with this for a very long time. But I mean, you raise a good point here. This happened in super fast speed here. We're seeing a vaccine in less than a year. That is unheard of. Usually this is a process that takes years. So what's the secret this year? Why did it happen so quickly now?
As far as we learned over the process, I think, first of all, really based on the technologies and also knowledge that we have built over the years. Nothing comes like in a vacuum. So the scientists, as soon as we learn the sequences, so the scientists from all over the world put into their own platform, either is an mRNA-based or vector-based or killed viral forms, put into their vaccine platforms. Secondly, the regulatory agencies has transformed many sequential procedures into parallel procedures to accelerate the entire process, but certainly involving a tremendous gut and risk. So far, I think the results proven to be very successful and very correct. The risk is worth taking. I would congratulate those scientific agencies put this on top of their agenda.
Yeah, I mean, the effectiveness rate is astounding on some of these vaccines. So, I mean, Dr. Carroll, though, with this rush process raises concerns from a lot of people in the public about the safety of these vaccines. Is the hesitation at all justified?
Well, first off, I think we've seen an unprecedented transparency in the review process for the vaccine trials. And so I think we should have very high level of confidence in the results of those trials. Secondly, there are open questions. Again, as you noted, we've rushed very quickly to be able to generate these vaccines. And there will need to be a very heightened level of monitoring populations after vaccination to really ensure that the safety that we've seen in the trials plays itself out on a very large scale and over a significant period of time. So it's not just the vaccination, it's also monitoring the long-term effects of the vaccine to ensure that you're not only getting protection, but it remains safe over time. And then thirdly, there is this open question about how long the protective effect will be. And that's also a question that we need to answer. That will speak very much to the question of will we be able to bring this pandemic under control? If it's a short-lived vaccine in terms of its protective effect, months or even just a year, it's going to be very challenging to be able to continue to maintain a high level of vaccination coverage. So many more questions to be answered, but there is a strong platform for being able to do that.
But you know, Dr. Carroll, when the people in the public hear these questions from experts like you, that makes them think, maybe it's not quite ready. Maybe I should wait, see what happens, see once we get these answers. What needs to be done to calm those fears and push back against that?
Well, first off, the first people that will receive this vaccine are the highest risk group. If they don't get the vaccine, they have a much, much greater risk of adverse effects from infection. So it's not a zero-sum game. These people are going to be the most vulnerable, and health workers, people living with pre-existing conditions, elderly, they already are threatened directly by this virus. These vaccines will provide a level of protection that really merits their stepping forward and being confident that the risks greatly outweigh the consequence of not having a vaccine. We've seen in the United States 300,000 people die in the last 9 months. That's the reality of this virus. The vaccine offers an enormous amount of hope.
Yeah, the numbers speak loudly, without question. You know, a lot of people are also sounding off on social media, so I want to kind of roll through that real quickly here, give you a sampling of different tweets. But one stood out in particular from this one person who said, you know, for those who are skeptical about the vaccine because we don't know about its effects 10 years down the line, just remember that we also don't know the side effects of COVID-19 on survivors 10 years down the line. Which risk are you willing to take? Dr. Munir, your thoughts on that?
Yes, absolutely. I think, I mean, the major distrust that public is having is that the vaccine has been rushed through and we don't really know how are the long-term impact, particularly with the mRNA-based vaccines, Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna. Well, one thing I would like to highlight is that, of course, this is the first vaccine ever been registered or will be registered, Moderna, relatively sooner. The mRNA technology has been out there, and the first mRNA-based vaccine has been trialed in human back in 2013 against rabies virus. And then since then, we have 9 trials based on the mRNA-based vaccine in human population, and none of them has been terminated. All are recruiting or completed. There isn't any side effect that have led to termination of those projects. So basically, what I wanted to make a point here is that we know having only 2 months safety profile since the end of the phase 3 trial for those 2 vaccines. We are talking about at least 7 to 8 years of safety profile based on the mRNA-based vaccine technologies. So I think what we need to do is to make sure that we look onto the actual figures and then demonstrate how much the risk it poses. But I do understand at the same time that none of the pharmaceutical is without any side effect. So 1 in 1 million probably would have some direct or indirect side effect. But 1 in 1 million risk is also that the flying aeroplane can fall onto the roof, or taking car onto the road could lead to an accident. So we have to weigh out like that.
So Dr. Munir, let me ask you then, kind of playing off of this, there has been talk about maybe requiring vaccinations. That's definitely a fear for a lot of people that, you know, if not government, then maybe companies, employers might require people to get vaccinated. Do you think that's a good idea?
No, I don't really think so, because mandating vaccine raised some other complication, probably broader than the COVID-19 infection itself. But I think one thing we need to make sure through the activities we are doing now is to raise the trust and to really engage the public and bring the government on board in such a way that we can bring the reality so that people are willing themselves to take the vaccine. And I think I do know that there is a range of vaccine hesitancy. For example, in the UK, 1/3 people probably won't take the vaccine. But I think one of the important aspects I would like to highlight here is that there is a structural racism that is even more contributing into the vaccine hesitancy. For example, if we look onto the survey conducted in London, only 40% of the black ethnic minority people would take the vaccine compared to 70% British white. So that is kind of the things that we have to work on to engage with the local realities so that we can really build the trust onto the vaccines.
And Dr. Carroll, does that concern you? I mean, when you hear these numbers, these concerns from different groups within different countries, do you think this could affect the effectiveness of vaccination programs? Dr. Carroll.
Well, certainly, and it's a major concern. People's resistance to vaccines is something that we've been grappling with now for several decades. And in the case of the COVID-19 virus, not getting the kind of coverage that's needed, as mentioned earlier, we really need to get 70% of the population covered with these vaccines. So any resistance, any significant number of people who do not get vaccinated really undercut the real value of the vaccination campaign if we hope to bring this virus under control. So I think building trust and confidence is really, we need to put a premium on that. Where people are skeptical, we need to address those concerns openly and frankly, and we need to have a very high level of transparency. We will see some adverse effects over time. Again, we're going to be dealing with multiple vaccines, not just the 2 that we've seen going through the approval procedures now. So there is a risk of adverse effects, but we need to understand how significant those are. We can't be dismissive. We need to help people understand this issue of risk, and those what will likely be minor adverse effects need to be understood against the clear and real threat posed by this virus.
Professor Zhang, let's talk about China real quickly in vaccination campaigns. I mean, China is really unique in this regard. Largely has the virus under control here. Do you think that we'll see mass vaccination campaigns in China like what we're starting to see happen in the UK and the US?
I think China has been facing the similar challenges, in particular in terms of vaccines. And there are, despite of the success in development some of the vaccines, the general public still in the suspicion mode, as the 2 professors just said, reflecting the UK and the US situation. It is really up to the scientists and governments to be highly transparent and to deliver the scientific information, the processes, this vaccine development, also the regulatory approval, so the general public will have a much more confidence and trust in the entire process. we haven't, as far as I know, we haven't started any massive mandate of vaccination, which I don't believe is correct. And then when we start it, we'll begin to learn more about how confident the general public will be. But I could imagine a similar situation will be happening in China.
I want to continue this conversation, but we have got to take a quick break for the moment. You are watching Dialogue. More after this.
Science has never been important than now. What is the major difference of being a scientist from being an average person?
Scientists, they are working on what we do not know.
A good scientist is wrong 90% of the time, and a really good scientist is wrong 99% of the time.
What is scientific spirit?
Ability to judge scientifically, judge correctly.
Science is the discovery of the truth.
Science needs to be a problem solver. Science can enlighten our life.
You're watching Dialogue. We are talking about COVID-19 and vaccines now underway in parts of the world. Professor Zhang, I want to pick up where we just left off and focus again on China. China has several vaccines in production right now. Some of the front runners are from Sinopharm and Sinovac, two different firms here. Where do the Chinese vaccines stand right now?
There are several vaccines being tested in human, in particular the one that you just mentioned, tested in a phase 3 trial right now. The official result has not been released, so we will be hearing from them soon. But apart from the two that you mentioned, there are several other strategies being developed also, like vector-based vaccines, mRNA-based vaccines, and some recombinant form protein-based vaccine also has entered clinical trials. So it will take a little longer to learn how safe and effective those vaccines will be, and that will be expected in the first quarter of next year.
And help us understand why we haven't heard more information earlier, especially since several countries, have approved some of these Chinese vaccines. I think it's upwards to 1 million people in China have been vaccinated voluntarily as part of these trials. Why have we not heard more yet?
It must reflect the complexity of the entire processes, because it's not been conducted majority of them are not being conducted in China. You have to go through certain processes to have independent reviews, and then the result will be summarized and publicized. So I could imagine the far-reaching activities will cost some time to get out the official figure.
Dr. Carroll, you talked about the fact that there are different vaccines in different countries here, and you raised concerns about transparency. Do you have some concerns about transparency when it comes to some of these other vaccines we're starting to emerge around the world?
Well, the answer is, of course, as we see more and more vaccines become available, we really need to hold all of those vaccines to the highest standards and really be able to rigorously evaluate both their efficacy and their safety. So any questions about the study trials needs to be answered in advance, and I would hope that all vaccines that are going to be made to the public will be subject to the type of rigorous evaluations that we've seen both the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines go through. Again, it's not only making sure that they are effective and safe, but that to the general public, that they understand the safety and the effectiveness. Because as we said before, it really is about compliance. Are we going to get the numbers of people that need to be vaccinated? And a key to that will be people's believing that what they are being vaccinated with is to their own betterment and do not have questions. So as more vaccines roll out, holding them to the highest possible standards of evaluation is going to be really essential to be able to get this level of compliance.
You know, Dr. Munir, I also sometimes get the impression that patience is running out in some countries. I'll point to Hungary as an example, which says it plans to import up to 1 million doses of vaccines from China and Russia. Hungary, obviously part of the European Union, which has not approved, as far as I know, a vaccine yet. That is raising concerns from the bloc. They're not too happy with this idea. Why do you think we're seeing Hungary do this?
Well, based on the scientific reasoning, what I can say is that there is a limited capacity for the front-runners vaccines. For example, Pfizer's and Moderna. And Pfizer, they can only make 50 million doses in this year, and those have already been contracted with different countries. So unavailability, I think, is one of the major driving factors to look for the alternative. And when we look onto the alternative, of course, Sinopharm, Sinovac, Sputnik 5, these are the next choices after Moderna, Pfizer, and AstraZeneca in terms of the speed and the advancement into the phase 3 and the data availability. So I think it's more driven with the desire than driven by any politics or the government.
But is there an impression that, well, I think there is an impression among some people that some of these regulators in various countries are moving too slowly. Is that fair?
No, I don't really think so. I think one of the important aspects of vaccine safety is to have all the data assessed in a proper way. I mean, we have waited for vaccine for a year, and primarily because we wanted to generate the data that is reliable enough. And then I think waiting another 1 month and really going through all that information, that is ginormous, actually. I mean, if we look onto 40,000 volunteers who have participated into phase 3 trial, and each person have a history right from the vaccine injection until the last day of the conclusion of the trial. It's a massive information that need to go through those regulatory bodies, and I think we should not rush into the approving of the vaccines, because that could pose some challenges as well, that why the approval process has been rushed. But I do understand at the same time the unprecedented need, so the time should not be wasted, but the time that is required to properly assess the vaccine should have been spent and should be spent.
I mean, Dr. Carroll, playing off this, I have friends in other countries who are looking at the United States, who are looking at the United Kingdom. They've seen the videos of people getting shots in the arm, and they're wondering, why is that not happening where I'm living? How do you answer that question?
Well, that's a very good question, and this is one of the real challenges we have going forward into 2021, the issue of equitable access to the vaccines as they become available. There's always going to be greater demand than supply, and the issue is, how do we really address the concerns that the most vulnerable people are not getting access to these vaccines. So I would hope that in the case of the United States, that we will join an already existent alliance under the aegis of the World Health Organization and the Global Access Vaccine Initiative, Gavi, for trying to make sure by the end of 2021 there are 2 billion doses of vaccines that can be made available to the countries that do not have the kind of purchasing power that the United States or European countries might have. So it's a huge ethical issue, but even more profoundly, it's about bringing this virus under control. And as long as this virus remains out of control anywhere in the world, no matter what we do within our own borders, will not maximize the impact of the vaccine. We need to make sure that the most vulnerable and those of greatest need around the world are having as equitable access to this vaccine as possible.
Professor Zhang, one concern I've heard is the fact that the Pfizer vaccine in particular must be transported, stored in very, very cold temperatures. I think it's minus 70 degrees Celsius. Is that really a hindrance for a lot of countries around the world? Do they not have the capability to store vaccines at that temperature?
That's certainly a big logistic issue, even facing for the developed countries, not mentioning the developing countries. So, but that is the issue that the Pfizer and the BioNTech scientists has been dealing with. Because learning from the news, I know that they have been working on these issues, try to overcome this lower temperature logistic problems. Hopefully, in the not distant future, they will come up with a solution that doesn't require this extremely low temperature shipping and storage. But at the same time, there are many other vaccines perhaps will be approved in the near future that will complement what is going on with the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine shortage. Overall, we are all in this for this solving problems. The different strategies will play a major role in complementing each other to bring this epidemic into control.
So what do you think is the major roadblock to get vaccines to developing countries?
That will require a systematic organization as management, like a COVAX campaign that's being led by Gavi and CP and WHO. The countries that are capable of making the vaccines will have to chip in to make the initial aim of 2 billion doses for those countries that greatest need and not able to get access to at this moment. So the supplies and also the management system and distribution capacities, and that will help altogether to get this equitable access into realization.
You know, Dr. Munir, we keep talking about the COVAX program, and I want to remind our viewers what that is exactly. It's a WHO program to try to basically distribute vaccines to all countries around the world. But the United Nations Secretary General says it needs more money. I think the latest numbers I saw was $4 billion for COVAX. So, Dr. Munir, how big of a problem is that? Does the program need more money? And if they don't get it, what happens?
Oh, certainly, I think one of the major stumbling blocks for the access and equitable access is the financial complications, because when it comes to low and middle income countries, I mean, the COVAX facility has already promised to provide them 3% of the low and middle income countries' population, and 3% access is certainly not sufficient to protect even vulnerables. And then we talk about the frontline health workers and also care homes and nursing homes. So certainly that required a massive influx of the money, not only just from the developing country, but also the contribution from the United Nations, and also to the extent the developing countries can contribute, because ultimately what we are talking about is a commodity that it is become as a commodity now. So it's a commodity that every country needs it. So certainly every country is trying to scoop most of the capability of the pharmaceutical. For example, if we talk about the UK, we have 70 million people, but we already contracted 355 million doses, which are 5 times more than our need. And 14% of the developed world has scooped more than 54% of the capabilities of the pharmaceutical. So that's really one of those challenges that we have to tackle if we really want to make the herd immunity globally to really curtail the pandemics.
Yeah, one of many challenges ahead. And so, Dr. Carroll, as we look towards the future here, and we look towards these vaccination programs rolling out around the world, I mean, the big question a lot of people are asking is, when will this end? When will I be able to take off the mask? When can I travel again? When can I hug my loved ones? How do you answer that?
Well, first off, we need to remind people that even as vaccines are becoming available, it does not stop us the requirement of wearing a mask and providing appropriate safe distancing. So I would hope we continue to emphasize those messages. But it's only when we get the type of coverage that's been mentioned before, in excess of 70%, and certainly all of the high-risk groups, all of the health workers, all of the elderly, and those people with pre-existing conditions. Once we get that population covered, we heard from Dr. Fauci yesterday. His own projection within the United States is sometime late spring, early summer. We will start seeing the beginning shift back to some normalcy. That might be a little early, but soon in the year 2021, certainly between the second and third quarter, we'll start seeing the opportunity to begin relaxing some of these stringent measures that have affected all of us.
It definitely seems like after a very long, difficult year, there is some hope and light at the end of the tunnel. Our thanks to all of our guests. Thank you so much for your time and your insight today. We appreciate it. And that is going to do it for this edition of Dialogue. I'm Jonathan Betts. Thanks so much for watching. Keep it here. There's still much more ahead on CGTN.